I wrote this trio sonata for two Baroque violins, Baroque cello, and organ, using Alfred Schnittke's idea of polystylism, which I expanded to include elements of 18th century performance practice. Schnittke was a German-Soviet composer who coined the term polystylism in 1971. It's essentially what it sounds like, combining many different styles by means of quotation and allusion. One means of quotation that Schnittke often used were monograms, or spelling the names of different persons with music. I included the monograms of Schnittke and Shostakovich in this work, which serves as the main musical material that is developed throughout. Performance practice deals with the conventions surrounding the performance of music from a given period. Elements of performance practice specific to the Baroque era include the instruments themselves, tuning and temperament, national style, ornamentation, and the general philosophy, which was based heavily off of the Enlightenment ideas of rhetoric and affect. A key difference between Baroque and modern instruments are the strings used. Today we use metal strings. Back then they used gut strings, which have a very different timbre that I considered while writing this piece. Another key difference was the bow that was used. Today, our modern bow is arched this way and is generally the same weight throughout the entire length of the bow. The Baroque bow, however, arched the opposite direction and was quite a bit lighter at the tip than it was at the frog. This allowed for inequality of different notes, which was turned into the idea of beat hierarchy. I exploited this idea a lot in this piece. I chose the title Sonata da Chiesa, or Church Sonata, because I felt this piece is more reminiscent of a church sonata rather than the chamber sonata or Sonata da Camera. A key difference between the two was the use of dance movements as titles for movements in the chamber sonata to indicate tempo, and the use of tempo words in the church sonata. I used tempo words for movement titles. Another key element of the church sonata was that it was generally more contrapuntal than the chamber sonata. My trio sonata is heavily contrapuntal, and my approach to writing the counterpoint was informed by my study of 18th century counterpoint techniques. Aside from being a scholarly endeavor, this piece has allowed me to combine my various musical interests and thus write what makes me happy. For me, Baroque music is the purest form of joy. I love the timbre of gut strings, the inequality and lightness created by the bow, the idiomaticity of the music, and the perfect balance of logic and emotion that this music embodies. I love the incredible freedom that comes with polystylism as well. I can be anything I want. It's not a restrictive label. Without further ado, here's my Sonata da Chiesa, performed by my mentors Greg Young and Carrie Krauss, my friend Ansel Fitteman, and myself.
I'm Chris Cunningham, a senior in music education at Montana State University. My Senior Capstone project is Insights on Composition, Assistance on a Faculty Manuscript. My faculty advisor is Dr. Greg Young. Composition Insights is a manuscript co-authored by Dr. Greg Young and Dr. Steve Roans. The composition process is often talked about but seldom written about. It is traditionally taught one-on-one or learned alone. This can make it difficult to learn and often leads to questions like how to begin a composition or how to further develop ideas you have. These insights aim to provide a step into the world of composition and shed light on aspects that have always been daunting to take on without instruction. What is composition? Is composition just writing down music? Yes and no. There are three main forms of writing down music: composition, arrangement, and transcription. Composition is the process of creating a new and original piece of work that no one has heard before. And the musical ideas on the page are the ones you've created. Arrangement is the process of taking an existing piece of music and adapting it for a different musical group or different instruments. With arrangement, the arranger can feel free to make alterations to the score while keeping the integrity of the piece the same. Transcription is the process of adapting an existing piece of music for another group than originally written without making these changes. While all of these practices have similarities, composition is the only one where you are creating your own original piece of new music. When writing your own music, there are many places to start. Someone might think of a melody in their head and try to expand it into a full piece. Others might love the way a chord progression sounds, or have a concept or story in their head they want to set to music. There are endless ways to start a piece, and they all have their own path. Starting with inspiration is a great place to begin, and we'll cover this subject more on our next slide. Starting with a concept, you want to make sure you sit with your concept and try to develop it as much as you can. Having an idea can get you excited to start writing. However, you may find without developing this idea, the inspiration can be short-lived. Try to think of the idea from start to finish. It doesn't need every detail, just a storyboard. With melody, you want to keep all the melodies you write, even if you never use them for a piece. You will gain experience and learn what you do and don't like the more you compose. You can come back to these melodies and extend them or change them to suit what your ear likes after getting some experience. When composing, we often want to jump straight to the melody. However, starting with the chord progression can help establish a foundation for the entire piece. Starting with form allows you to zoom out and plan the beginning and the end, and how to get there. This allows you to see the progression of your composition and can even give you checkpoints throughout the piece. Lyrics can also give you a sense of direction for the mood of a piece. Understanding what emotion you want to convey before you begin will help you from unintentionally misrepresenting lyrics, especially if they aren't your own. Collaborating with other composers can open your eyes to new ideas that may have never come to you before. Inspiration can come from many places and can be hard to come by. American Impressionist painter Walter Russell put it best when he said, "Inspiration only comes to those who seek it." Dr. Young asked his composition class to come up with a list of where inspiration can come from, and as you can see, inspiration can come from practically anywhere. Listening to music can be a great source of inspiration and knowledge. Most of us would say we know how to listen to music. We do it all the time, in the car, in the shower, while working out, or even sleeping. However, this kind of listening is passive. The music just washes over us as we carry out our lives. This kind of listening does not lend itself to learning or inspiration. To listen actively is a much different activity and can take effort to learn to do well. First, you want to remove any distractions. Treat your listening time like you're at a concert in person. Turn your phone off, avoid talking to others while listening, and you can even dim the lights for a more involved experience. Listening should be where all your attention is directed, and moving these distractions will help. Listening in layers, listen like you're reading a hard passage of a textbook. Active listening can take multiple listens and rewinding. Take your time to listen to specific aspects of work. Listen for the melody, harmony, texture, form, and mood. Listen for them individually. Listen for them and how they work together. Listen in pieces. Don't be afraid to listen to parts of a piece repeatedly or to step back and take a break. Especially with large works, active listening can be tiring, and breaks to let your ear rest and reset are necessary. And last, be honest about what you hear. Listen for what you do and don't like. Understanding what you don't like in music can be just as important as knowing what you do like. It can help you avoid creating things you might want to throw out entirely, and instead you'll have material you can tweak into a final piece. When writing, it can be easy to get stuck into an idea. You have your melody figured out, but you don't know where to go from there. How do I take an idea that may only be a few measures long and develop it into a full piece of music? Students from Dr. Young's composition class gave a few ideas on how they develop an idea or practice developing ideas. You can play familiar chord progressions on the piano and make small changes. Play common chord progressions and try to extend them and find different chords to add. Repeat the progression, adding chords and finding new places to go. Experimenting at the piano with a friend. Try to build off each other's ideas. It can be hard to develop an idea from start to finish all on your own. Doing this with a friend can lead to ideas you may never have come to alone. Writing for different instruments. Change the instrument you are writing for, and this can be useful by getting a new timbre in your ear and can bring new ideas to you. Always having one sound in your head can lead to similar results, so it's good to change things up. Picking out melodies on my instrument from movies, or changing melodies you've recognized in popular music. Try taking a melody you know or have written and change one note. Note how it changes the melody. Try a different note or adding a note. By changing just one note in the melody, you can pretty dramatically change the mood of it. Apply this to your own compositions. Don't try to make huge changes all at once. Make small changes and see where they lead you. It can feel wrong to use another composer's work as inspiration for your own. However, using great pieces of work as your guide can lead you down paths you may never have got to on your own. There are many ways to go about using existing works as inspiration, and when used well, they can lead to great insights and new ideas. A great way to borrow music is by taking the melody of a piece you like and manipulate it in different ways. Try playing the melody backwards or even turning the page upside down. Audiences need time to spend with an idea to hear its variations and how it changes so they can get to know it. When the audience is comfortable with a musical idea, then it's changed, this makes for an impactful moment. If new ideas are constantly being thrown out at the listener, they never feel a sense of home or connection, and the whole piece can feel empty. It can be difficult to be honest and objective about your strengths, weaknesses, and your work. A mentor is there to show you what you do well, help with what you struggle, and give honest feedback about your music. Composition is also a very personal process, so it's important to be emotionally distant from feedback and also have a mentor that will be honest without crushing your motivation. Some things to look for in a mentor are someone that inspires you. You want to learn from someone who is making or has made the kind of music you aspire to make and is confident in their craft. You want someone that believes in you. Find someone who believes that you have what it takes to make the music you want. If they're excited to work with you, they will put in their best effort. Find someone who will challenge you. Someone who is not only going to push you, but someone that is only going to accept your work, and they will push you farther than you may have thought possible. You want someone that's going to be honest. You want a mentor to be honest about your work, what works and what doesn't, so you can come to the best possible result. You want to find a mentor that will be honest, but in a way that isn't disheartening or discouraging. You want a mentor that's flexible. There should be a balance between teaching through normal practices that have been used for decades and sometimes centuries, and teaching you how you learn best. Learning your way has its obvious advantages. However, there is a reason some practices have stood the test of time, and often the work you struggle with the most is what helps you grow. And lastly, you want someone with expertise. It's important to have a mentor who has gone through the process of learning composition themselves. They understand the common pitfalls and issues and know the steps to success. It has been an interesting endeavor learning about the details of what it takes to become a composer, and I would like to thank my faculty advisor, Dr. Greg Young, for allowing me to assist him with his manuscript. It was a great opportunity and I learned a lot. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hello, my name is Eve Dunkel. I am a music education senior at Montana State University, and today I'm going to be presenting my Senior Capstone project on the Montana High School Guitar Program Survey. Some research questions that I am seeking to address in this project are: how are guitar programs beneficial to students' education in music? And what do guitar programs contribute to the music curriculum? And how does that inform schools' inclusion of guitar class in their programs? Some areas of interest that I looked into are student involvement in music and continued involvement in music, the relationship of guitar class to other music programs in the curriculum, and the enjoyment and depth of musical knowledge that students gain from taking guitar class. I conducted 4 interviews, one with Dr. Monty Grisey, the Arts Education Director for the Missoula Public Schools, another with Andrew Loftus, the Director of Fine Arts and Student Programs for Bozeman Public Schools, and 2 guitarists and guitar educators, Steve Eccles in Kalispell, Montana, and Steve Merriman here in Bozeman, Montana. I also had the Bozeman High School guitar class take a survey for me. Some common threads in the interviews that I did were the unique opportunity that guitar class offers to students to study music. It was mentioned several times that going through the whole program takes years. If someone wants to participate in band, choir, or orchestra in high school, they often would have had to take it in middle school or even elementary school. So guitar class provides a meaningful musical experience at an entry level that also progresses, so it's accessible to high school students. The relationship between guitar class and other music classes is not negative. It attracts numbers to the music program, if not directly to band, choir, or orchestra. And it also adds vibrancy. I have a quote here from Steve Merriman. "There's a lot of students that haven't done any other music. Maybe they did music in elementary school or a little bit in middle school, but in high school, they would never have had any other music class if it were not for the guitar program." Another thing is that guitar class appeals to and benefits particular types of students. It might appeal to kids that don't like academics. And I have a quote here from Dr. Monty Grisey about a particular student he had in one of his classes. "He was kind of a kid that could get into trouble easily, but I never had a second of trouble with him in guitar class because he was doing what he loved doing." Another area I wanted to touch on was the growth in musical knowledge that students gain from guitar class. Both guitar teachers that I interviewed seek to integrate both music literacy and listening skills into their guitar class. Theory is an inevitable part of guitar class because guitar is a harmonic instrument and you have to understand harmonies. Both teachers also try to give their students tools that they can use to learn music outside of class and even continue learning after they're done with the class. Guitar is a very versatile instrument that can be played in multiple styles and genres, and it fits into many different contexts. You can use it to accompany singing. You can play rock or pop music. A lot of students want to learn to play guitar so they can lead worship or play in local bands. It was also mentioned that guitar class is relatively inexpensive. For $4,000, you could have a whole program, whereas for band, one instrument might cost almost that much. I asked the interviewees about students' involvement and continued involvement in music. The teachers sought to provide skills to their students so that the students could continue to enjoy guitar and play guitar, and give them a taste of all the different styles so that they were hooked and wanted to pursue it on their own. The teachers mentioned that they see their students playing in Facebook videos, in bands, local bands, doing music ministry, and even just playing during lunch hour after taking the class. Steve Eccles said, "I am of the philosophy that the songs and stuff that we play, many of them they will play for their whole life, and they are encouraged to keep their handouts, not as a high school handout, but as a life handout." Steve Merriman said, "With just a little bit of knowledge and skill, it's something you could do for the rest of your life and enjoy for the rest of your life." I had 42 Bozeman High students take my anonymous Likert scale survey, which consisted of 9 questions. They were asked to state their level of agreement from strongly agree to agree. Here I have 2 tables representing that data, and they are the percentages of students who answer to each level of agreement. The first table is all the percentages, and the second table is those same percentages, but I collapsed the strongly agree and agree categories. In the first question I asked, if I were not in guitar class, I would definitely take a different music class. You can see that about half of the students disagreed with this question, meaning that if it weren't for guitar, they wouldn't be in another class. Almost 30% though said they would take a different class. And number two, guitar class has taught me skills I will likely continue to use after high school. I had almost 70% of the combined category say that they would continue to use the skills they've learned in guitar class. And only about 4.8% said that they don't think they would. And number three, my knowledge of music has grown since being in this guitar class. Again, we have 65.6%, which is pretty high, and not too high. Only 7.1% of students say that they don't think they've gained a lot of knowledge in this class. Number four, I feel successful in guitar class. Most of them feel successful, about 76.2%, and only 2.4% don't feel successful. I think that number 3 and 4 really speak well to the teacher, and that the teacher's doing a good job with his students. In number 5, the subject matter interests me. I had my strongest positive feedback responses. You can see that 40.5% of students strongly agreed to this question. And if you combine the strongly agree and agree, it was 85.7%, and nobody disliked guitar class. So that's super positive. In number 6, guitar class offers me an opportunity to study music that I would not otherwise have. It was pointed out to me that there is another explanation or way to interpret this question than I originally intended. I intended this to mean that if it weren't for guitar class, I wouldn't have the opportunity to study music. But it could also be taken, I am exposed to music that I would not otherwise be exposed to by taking guitar class. If you look at the way I meant the question, you can see that about 54.8% of students said that this was true, whereas about almost 19% said that it wasn't true. I think that if my meaning came across in this question, this just means that these students would have taken a different class. In number 7, I feel that my participation in guitar class enhances my performance in other music classes. I got the strongest neutral response out of all of the questions. And I think this is because most of the students in guitar class aren't in any other music classes. And you can see that the agree side of the spectrum and the disagree side of the spectrum are actually pretty even. In number 8, guitar class allows me to apply what I've learned to play other music that I enjoy outside of class. I had about 73.8% say that they think this is true, which is very good because that's one of the goals of these teachers. And only 7% about said that this is not true. In number 9, guitar class provides me with a sense of community. I got about half the students saying that guitar class provides them with a sense of community. And the rest of the students either were neutral or disagreed with this. And I wonder if this is because high school students might not be looking for a sense of community in guitar class, but even the 50% is pretty positive. I think that the results from my survey and the interviews are overwhelmingly positive feedback about the guitar program and show that it is a valuable addition to public schools and that it's providing meaningful musical knowledge and experience to students. It would be interesting to do a study like this when there is not a global pandemic going on because COVID-19 may have affected the results as well. There is also the possibility of differences in interpretations of my survey questions. And I think this shows that you just need to be extremely careful when you are wording survey questions. I would love to look into not only guitar programs in high schools, but also middle schools and even elementary schools where there are sometimes ukuleles, as well as looking into the guitar programs across other states to see how valuable guitar can be in public schools across the states. I would like to give a very special thanks to all of my research participants, Dr. Monty Grise, Andrew Loftus, Steve Eccles, Steve Merriman, the high school guitar students at Bozeman High, Rose Alexandria for helping me analyze my data. That was extremely helpful. And my mentor, Dr. Gregory Young. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Olivia Houston, and this is my Senior Capstone research project presentation. So this is all about how choirs are affected by COVID-19 and how they're dealing with it. So purpose of the study was to kind of go in and talk to the choir members about how they think the semester is going. Choir is such a social activity. So I wanted to make sure that students are still getting a sense of community and a sense of connection with other singers while still dealing with the pandemic restrictions and everything. So yeah, data collection method. I did a survey for the choir members. I interviewed one of the directors, and on the survey, there's a section where they can give a little bit of feedback on how they think the semester is going, what they would change while still following the guidelines. And during the survey, I kind of phrased everything more as statements, whether so they could either disagree, agree, neutral, that kind of thing. So the first one was, I get a sense of community for performing in my ensemble. And it was really good to see this response. A lot of people agreed with it, which is kind of the overall theme of the research project. So it was really good to see that students are still getting that sense of community from performing in their ensemble, and yeah, it's still a positive experience for them. So the next question was, this semester has brought me the same level of human connection as previous choral experience. And this was, I kind of wanted them to compare this semester to other semesters rather than just getting a sense of community from this semester. And it was a totally different response. A lot of them disagreed. So yes, they're still getting a connection this semester, but it's not as strong as connections from previous semesters. So yeah, dealing with COVID has definitely affected that aspect of it. Not being able to see other singers' faces has affected my connection with them. And a lot of people agreed with this, which is understandable. You know, when you're singing, your face is really where all the emotion comes from. And if you can't see this much of your face, like, it's hard to get something across, especially if you're singing like in a different language or anything. You know, it's so important to have that expression. And now singers really just need to bring it up to your eyes and your eyebrows. And, you know, even watching a performance, would you rather see really expressive, like, singing faces, or just eyes? So, you know, it really does affect how you connect with either other singers or your audience. So the music learning process is efficient. A lot of people agreed with this. I think I probably should have phrased it more in comparison to previous semesters, but this is a really good response. I think it has a lot to do with our director. He's really good at keeping us on track and staying efficient during rehearsals, so that's really important. Based on how choir is going so far this semester, you will continue to be involved in it next semester. And this was a great response. A lot of people just agreed, which is great, seeing that, you know, COVID isn't negatively affecting how they feel about choir in general. You know, it's not going to deter them from still being involved in it, which is really important. Yeah, it kind of affects the whole dynamic of the group, but they still want to be involved, so it's still a positive experience. COVID-19 has had a negative effect on the ensemble dynamic, and a lot of people agreed with this, which is kind of expected. You know, not being able to see people's faces and that thing, and being so far apart, it definitely messes with how connected you feel. I think looking back, I should have used maybe a different word other than negative. I think COVID has just definitely had an effect. I'm not sure if it's negative or positive, just because so much of what we're doing is different than what we've ever done. So I think some aspects are going to be really positive. We're going to take it away and say we're going to keep doing this. And some aspects are going to be like, probably shouldn't keep doing that for next semester, kind of thing. So there will be positive and negative effects on the ensemble. Choir is more stressful due to fewer group rehearsals during the week. This is kind of more of a spread out answer. Some people agreed, some people disagreed, and I kind of see both sides because we're not meeting as a group so much. We are required to do like personal recordings of ourselves, which is so much more stressful. Singing by yourself is way different than singing with a group. And, it's so much more vulnerable when you're singing by yourself and listening to your voice back in the recording, so much different. So that might add a little bit of stress. But I also see that because we're not meeting all the time during the week, you have more time to focus on other classes or other things that are going on in your life, which might reduce stress a little bit. So kind of a give and take a little bit there. Thoughts of the directors. I did interview one of the directors, and I just kind of wanted to give overall themes of the interview. And a big one was, students are just happy to be in person. So much of our social interaction has been taken away that, any social interaction is going to be a positive experience. And yes, it's a little more hard to learn music and, really polish it and get it ready for performance. But, we're dealing with it the best way we can. And he really stressed that getting feedback from students is really helpful for structuring next semester. And we are going to change things up a little bit, try new things, all that. Feedback from the singers. I was really surprised that most of it was very positive feedback. We're just doing the best we can was really the big overall theme. Yes, I would like to not wear a mask when I'm singing, but I have to. So, a big one was we just really want to be all together. This semester we've been kind of splitting it between a group rehearsal and then a couple sectionals during the week, and then another group rehearsal at the end of the week, which is a little harder just because we're not all together. And I definitely think this semester we've improved a lot on our individual musicianship, which is always really positive. So that might be another positive takeaway from the semester. So what does it all mean? I don't think it's as bad as it seems. Yes, it's very different than anything we've ever done, but I think still meeting and still singing is a really positive thing. And I think students are really enjoying it. And yes, we miss being all together all the time, but the fact that we're able to be all together some of the time is really great. Faces are really important when you're singing, and it really does affect the ensemble. Especially with emotion and breathing. If you can't see someone kind of breathing or, that kind of thing. Yes, it's a little more stressful, but, overall, the whole question that I asked, are we still getting a connection? Yes, we are. It's not as strong as it has been in previous semesters, but it's definitely still there and people are still getting a really positive experience. So, final thoughts. This is a really fun project to do, and I really enjoyed kind of getting the feedback from the singers, and just to kind of see how we want to frame things next semester and for the future. Like if anything like this happens again, we can kind of know what works and know what doesn't work and that kind of thing right off the bat instead of having to deal with it right then. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and I'll see you later.
Hi, I'm Zacharias Masiba, and today I'll be presenting the practices of Montana violin makers. How does somebody take a chunk of wood and make it into a beautiful instrument? Well, in this presentation, we'll be discussing the violin making processes of 3 Montana luthiers from start to finish. Stephen Boone has been residing in Bozeman since 2004 and has been an active luthier for over a decade. During his time here, Mr. Boone has created over 60 violins, violas, and guitars. Mr. Boone is a self-taught luthier, meaning, in his own words, that he has to pay for all the mistakes that he makes along the way. He says that after 10 years of self-training, he's likely at the same place as somebody who went to a luthiering school for 4 years. Mr. Boone stressed that the most important aspect of a pleasant violin sound was ensuring that the top plate of the violin vibrates relative to how the back plate of the violin vibrates. The sound post, pictured on the right, is also important for a good sound. He said if it's wedged in too tight, then the instrument can't vibrate as well. Mr. Boone buys his wood from a supplier in Virginia, who in turn gets his wood from Romania. He also buys more intricate pieces, pegs, tail pieces, and such, from an outfit in Maryland. The four main parts Mr. Boone focused on are the rib structure, the back plate, the top plate, and the neck, all of which are made by hand. When gluing everything together, he ensures that the top, back, and rib structure are all parallel and were all similarly and recently made. The neck and the scroll, the swirly bit at the top of the violin, is hand-carved and difficult to make, sometimes taking as long to make as the entire body of the instrument, which is about 10 days. The shape of the arches took especially long to get right for Mr. Boone. The only way to feel good about it is to repeat the process many times. The climate in Bozeman is perfect for violin making. Mr. Boone says that his shop is usually around 50% humidity and that it's easy to maintain, only needing to bring in a humidifier during the winter times. Mr. Boone stated that the cost of a violin is heavily determined by name brand and the recognition of the maker. For him, however, Mr. Boone prefers to price his instruments based on how much labor went into creating it. As he makes more instruments, he generally raises the price, knowing that each one was better than the last. Mr. Boone regularly repairs instruments for Bozeman public schools, mostly for the middle schools. He's happy to be a resource for the Bozeman music community, especially for young, developing players that need help. Over in Missoula, we have Mark Hollinger. Mr. Hollinger began making violins in Montana in 1974 at the age of 16. He's worked and studied across Europe and the US, winning several awards for violins that he made. Mark Hollinger attended the Violin Making School of America in Salt Lake City, completing his studies in 1983. In our interview, Mr. Hollinger emphasized that good-sounding instruments must have every variable put together in a detailed fashion. Everything in the violin is made to work together, and there's no one secret to a good sound. Mark has bought his wood from Europe since the 80s, building up an impressive collection of wood ever since. Mr. Hollinger starts by creating a template from one of his several violin models. He works on the fine details of the scroll and the outline, then makes a mold that the template can be put around. He roughs out the wood to meet the parameters of his mold, then finishes by adjusting the woodwork and varnishing the product. Mark stated that the Missoula climate is similar to Cremona, Italy, where some of the finest violins ever made were built by Antonio Stradivari. The humidity and altitude allows the wood to season and dry out in a favorable way. Although he produces quality instruments, Mr. Hollinger said that being in Montana leads him to price his instruments lower. In his own words, you just can't charge in Montana what some of his colleagues would charge in New York. Mr. Hollinger has trained some people that help the local schools with repairs, but he doesn't have the time to do any himself. With his focus mainly on making violins, Mr. Hollinger tends to patrons on a national level, having instruments made by him scattered across the country. Our final stop is in Billings, where I interviewed John Kirk. Mr. Kirk is a cellist who has studied and played across the US and Europe. He began making violins in Billings in 1983 and has since made hundreds of violins, cellos, and violas. Mr. Kirk owned his craft through several apprenticeships across the country. He would observe his teachers making violins and would mimic them as much as possible, refining his work until it resembled what his teachers made. He states that after 4 years, it's possible to produce a decent instrument. Similar to what Stephen Boone stressed as important, John Kirk described the relation between the top plate of the violin and the bottom plate of the violin as a crucial relationship within the instrument. He also states that the resonance of the bass bar, pictured above, can give the violin a dark or light sound. In the beginning, Mr. Kirk acquired his wood from domestic suppliers in the western US, but eventually switched to buying German wood, stating that it provided more sound and a higher pitch than American wood. For violin bows, he prefers to buy fresh horsehair from his suppliers because old hair dries out and becomes brittle. Mr. Kirk specializes in machine making for his violins. After choosing a preset model to shape the violin after, various machines and computer programs carve the wood to a point where he can hand finish the minor details and make slight adjustments. Similarly to Mark Hollinger, John Kirk describes the varnishing process as a difficult learning curve. Varnish inhibits tone, so it's crucial to use the least amount possible. Billings's climate provides a stable amount of humidity, which is good for the violins, as sudden changes in heat or humidity can warp and damage the wood. Mr. Kirk said that in general, people judge an instrument by the quality of the wood. How the instrument sounds has some effect on its cost, but the main driver of the selling price is whether or not the violin has visual beauty. Besides repairing instruments for School District 2 in Billings, Mr. Kirk does repairs for several other Montana towns. Although he takes pride in making instruments, he admits that repairs usually take priority, as it pays the bills and keeps him occupied. These interviews display the important roles that each of these luthiers play in their respective musical communities, and how being in Montana affects their craft. For future research that will help advance the instrument-making field, it could be worthwhile to study the violin-making processes of luthiers in other states or regions, how the processes for making other instruments are affected by Montana's climate, and the community impact that luthiers have in a more urban or more rural environment. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to the 3 luthiers I interviewed for this project. Thank you to Stephen Boone of Bozeman, Mark Hollinger in Missoula, and John Kirk in Billings. I'd also like to give a big thank you to Dr. Greg Young, who helped guide me every step of the way during this project. Thank you.
Have you ever noticed that music has its own place in everyone's life? Whether that be musical study or late night jam sessions or sing-alongs in the grocery store, everyone experiences music in some way. Think back to your childhood. Now, many memories will flood your mind, but those songs, those repetitive, common knowledge songs are often among these memories. Songs like Ring Around the Rosie or The Chicken Dance are attached to our upbringings. Do you remember a song that was special to your parents? One that they would always listen to or play? I'm Clayton, and I'm a music major at Montana State University. In this study, I focused on the presence of music in the households of music students here at MSU. I found that 10 out of 11 music students at Montana State University came from households where music was supported. A common theme across all of the students interviewed is that music lends itself to a community aspect that these students enjoy. This makes sense, right? Why do we have concerts year-round for people from all over the world to attend together? How many times have you heard about a local jazz group performing at a cafe or restaurant? Sometimes you will find a solo pianist or other instrumentalist playing in public, but why are they playing in public? Some will say money, and that is sometimes the motive, but I think there is a strong argument for music's importance when it relates to unity among peoples. The households that supported musical prowess in children have produced the majority specifically of music education majors here at MSU. When it came time for these children to decide what to study in college, many of them reflected back upon their musical experiences. Let's take Robin, for example. Now, Robin is merely an alias, and all other names that you will hear will be as well. But the meat of potatoes, if you will, of the content will be very much a true account. Robin grew up in a Christian household, where worship music was at the forefront of her experiences. I think a big part of it was church. It was being on the worship team, and those kinds of things was an important thing for my family. Robin says in her interview, Robin had a sister and a brother who played piano and bass respectively, a mother who sung in church, a dad who played guitar, and a grandma who also played piano. Her house was full of musicians and instruments. My dad has an excessive amount of guitars. It's at least 10 or 12, she says. To my surprise, though, her family didn't gather together to play music that often. They were frequently attendees of church, so they would worship there together. But at home, their environment was much more along the lines of individual practice. Robin used a very loose definition of practice, referring to playing without a specific goal to make any progress. So, it would seem that simply being immersed in a musical community, Robin found her love for music, specifically that of Frederick Chopin. When asked about her favorite composer, she said, "I don't think I've heard a piece by him that I'm like, I don't like this. No, I think I get some of this from my grandma too. That's like one of her favorite composers as well." So, now, you might be asking yourself, why is this important? Why am I up here talking to you about all of this? So I ask you this question in return. What happens if a child comes from a musical home into a school that cut their musical program because of funding or ignorance of importance? Schools are quick to defend sports as an outlet for students. But what about the students that aren't interested in sports? Do they get an opportunity to have an outlet of their own? This is really important to Robin and is the fuel of her musical study at MSU. She remembers fondly a pianist that visited her school in 6th grade. The pianist inspired young Robin to be a pianist of that measure and continued playing piano ever since. I just want to be able to have the opportunity to give students the opportunity to pursue music, especially because I think part of it was coming from a smaller school. You don't have those opportunities, you know? I want to be able to be a part of a solution to that problem, she says. Now, on the contrary to Robin's very musical household, I found that 72.7% of music students at MSU came from households with parents that did not play music, or with one parent who was musically trained in high school, but did not continue until today. In these households, music was supported, even required in one case by the parents, even though they themselves were not musical. Could it be the very fact that created a curiosity for music? Was it the absence of musical parents, though still accompanied by their support for the student, that sparked the natural human desire to seek answers to the questions left unanswered? Perhaps we should facilitate a supportive community for our students in all areas to allow them the growth they need, rather than trying to promote one specific subject based upon what we think the students need. Now, the next result of this study, it wasn't sought after, it wasn't asked for, it was simply discovered as a correlation between two factors. 27.3% of students came from Christian homes. This stuck out to me simply from the fact that 27.3% were all musical homes, in the sense that everyone, parents, siblings, actively played music. They performed music together. They shared it. It made me think, why is it only the Christian households that were musical? This led me down to how I was defining a musical household. And I have defined a musical household as a household that shares music, that brings the family together and plays music with one another. The other 72.7% of the participants were the only musical inclined people in their homes, other than the occasional sibling that played an instrument for a couple of years. But I couldn't consider their households musical because they didn't share the music in the home. The music wasn't made together in the home. Let's take Rhonda, once again an alias. She had reported that she hadn't even known that her parents played any instruments until she was 22. We seem to have a case of shared musical moments versus unshared ones. Once again, we are back to the importance of community in music. Music brings not only the homes together, but also strangers from around the globe. And this is what music students enjoy. I think that we should promote community that allows them to explore this aspect of their creative sides. This study was really quite intriguing. As I continued with this study, I will gain a larger sample size. For 11 out of hundreds at MSU is quite a small number to produce firm results. I will also factor in non-music students to see if they were pushed away from music due to family pressure or simply didn't want to study music and relate that to their households as well. Thank you.
Hey there, my name is Chelsea Heiser, and for my Senior Capstone project at Montana State University, I chose to write a song called The Double Date. It is a modern cowboy song. In creating this composition, I drew inspiration from the history of cowboys, cowboy artists, and an experience I had with my friends. In the early 1500s, Spanish settlers brought cattle and horses to South America for farming and ranching. Among the natives, an original breed of cowboys were born. These men were called vaqueros. Known for their horsemanship and roping skills, ranchers hired these vaqueros to care for their livestock. In the mid-1800s, towards the end of the Civil War, ranchers began moving into the American West to raise their cattle and supply the increasing beef market. With them came the vaqueros. English speakers were quick to mistake the term vaquero for buckaroo. The Spanish term actually meaning cattleman or cowboy. Music and poetry became a large part of this culture through storytelling. As you can see on this slide, there's plenty of stories in just these pictures. A funny story can be told about the coyote. The story could be told about Henry Harris here on the black horse and these 5 young men posing for a picture. The Spanish guitar traveled north with the vaqueros since it was light and easy to pack and became a staple in what I am calling cowboy music. Other instruments that were easy to bring on the trail were the harmonica and the fiddle. In doing research for my song, I studied melodies, prosody, chords, poetry, and yodeling, as they are in cowboy songs, by listening to various cowboy artists, score study, and reading poetry and about buckaroos. In my study, I found that listening provided the most inspiration for my songs. Artists that I drew ideas from were old and new. Among these artists, Dave Stamey inspired humor in my writings as well as melodic line, and I looked to the Girls of the Golden West for yodeling ideas and technique. I drew ideas from other artists as well, and credit also goes to the cowboys I grew up singing along with. The story of this song comes from a ranch rodeo I competed in with my boyfriend Henry and our 2 friends who are also dating, Charlotte and Andy. The rodeo was in Walden, Colorado, and we really just entered up for fun. We were chatting before the rodeo and realized that our team name should have been the Double Date. The job we did was rather hysterical as Andy fell off his horse, Char blacked out, Henry refused to rope, and my 4-year-old horse turned for the gate every chance he got. I thought it would make a funny song. Here it is for you. This is the Double Date. A team of 4 we had in mind, 2 happy couples waiting in line. A ranch rodeo on our brains, the whiskey didn't help our roping game. We trotted to the arena for it was our turn. If we didn't know already, we were gonna learn. The so-called plan we made was left at the gate. Thus began the double date. first two tests, they started smooth. Had an easy rate, the cattle moved round a tree and through a gate. I rode in to cut out two. Come on, Charlotte, let 'em through. They ran out as I built my loop. A-dee, yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. Next we knew Andy lost his seat, dazed and confused with dirt in his teeth. Coming behind without his smoke, Henry had no intent to roam. A-dee, yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. Young Red didn't know much better, turned for the gate as my rope got tethered. Slipping through the hand, the steer escaped. Minutes flew by at a burning rate, as we all saw our fate. Defeat ended our double date. But we had fun. A-dee, yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. Yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jackson Houston, and I am a senior in music education here at Montana State University. For my Senior Capstone project, I compared and contrasted several outdoor concert venues in Bozeman, Montana. Little background for this project: with our current pandemic, it's created new challenges and restrictions for indoor concerts. Thus, I looked outdoors for a safer alternative. In Bozeman, there are several structures around town designed for music, and some that work well for it, even though they weren't designed. So I did 2 acoustic tests at all the locations to see what would work best. The 5 venues that I looked into include the top of Pete's Hill, the Bogart Park Band Shell. The community band has been using this shell for over 100 years. The Eagle Mount Pavilion, kind of a newer structure, concrete floor with a metal roof angled out. Then at Lindley Park, there's a concrete structure that had a painting on it, and which concrete works well for reflecting sound, so I did a test there. And then on campus, there's been several students and groups that have been rehearsing on the north side of Cheever, and it's kind of a concrete area that has fairly good acoustics. So the 2 different types of acoustic measurements that I did involve an impulse test and a subjective opinion survey. For the impulse test, I took 2 2x4s and I clapped them together. This creates a short burst of sound, and you record it with a microphone. I did from 75 feet away with the microphone on the highest setting. And then you put this on a visualization graph to see the reverb. Reverb is kind of an echo effect that you get with sound, and if there's too much of an echo, then it muddies up the overall sound and can mess up the acoustics. Then for the subjective opinion survey, I took a speaker and I played the first minute of Beethoven's 5th Symphony. I chose the piece because it's loud, it's quiet just in the first minute, and goes through all the different instrument sections, kind of to compare and contrast, make sure you can hear the woodwinds versus the strings versus the brass. And then I sent out a survey having people list their preference of recordings from 1 to 6. So to have a control to compare everything against, I did some tests in Reynolds Recital Hall. This is at MSU where you would likely see most of your music concerts. It is a space designed for acoustics, and on the right here you'll see the impulse test. This is a spectrum analyzer graph. I chose it because it creates a nice visualization. So the yellow color you see, that is the volume. The purple is a quieter volume. The higher up it goes is a higher pitch, and then kind of the lower is a lower pitch. And so I chose this graph because it kind of creates just nice color visualizations for the impulse test. But this is kind of the ideal look of what an impulse test would be. And then I did a test at Pete's Hill. You can see how different this test is because there's no concrete, it's just dirt and an open field. But you can see that there's a little bit of reverb back here, and this is caused from the neighborhood close by. When you do the impulse test, you would hear a little spike after of the sound reflecting off the houses and coming back. Definitely the most beautiful location, but not the most accessible and not the best acoustics. Next, I did a test at the Bogart Park band shell. This is kind of designed for acoustics, and it's kind of in a local neighborhood. So you'd get a pretty good initial impact, and then you'd get a little bit of reverb from the houses nearby, kind of like at Eagle Mount. It was all right acoustics. It's very accessible. It's kind of fun in summertime. Cars will park in front of the band shell here, and kind of makes for a nice, easy location close to town. Next up is the Eagle Mount Pavilion. You can see pretty good reverb that decays nicely, pretty sharp echo effect from the horse barn that is nearby the pavilion there. This is a concert of Pinky and the Floyd that took place at the Eagle Mount Pavilion. It's kind of a newer structure in town, so it's not quite as familiar with the community. You can kind of see in the spectrum graph here too, this is background noise caused from the sprinklers that were on while I was at the location. Kind of an interesting thing in the graph there, but overall, pretty good reverberation. Next up, this is the Lindley Park concrete structure. Nice painting on it. It's right next to the library. It does reflect sound. There's a little bit of background noise from an electrical box over here. I thought it had a pretty good reflection of sound. There was a bit of echo effect from the library nearby, but definitely a possible concert location. A little less accessible than Eagle Mount and Bogart Park just because you'd have to walk a little further, but otherwise very close to Main Street, but a lot of background noise from the road there as well. And then this is the North Cheever Nook. This one kind of wins the impulse test because it is most similar to the Reynolds Hall. It does have a little more reverb. You can see kind of by the wider size than Reynolds. And so this would be a good location for a smaller group of musicians, like up to 5 as in a brass quintet, a string quartet, a woodwind quintet. But for an orchestra or a band, this would not be the ideal location. It is very accessible because it's on campus, but parking is always an issue. And then these are the results from the survey. I had 12 participants, could always use more, but it kind of gave pretty interesting results I found. Reynolds and North Cheever were a little closer than I would have expected. Quite a few of the participants listed North Cheever as being their favorite location versus Reynolds, which I found to be pretty surprising. And then Eagle Mount came in a strong 3rd place, followed by Lindley, and then Pete's Hill and Band Shell were almost tied for last place, which I found pretty interesting because the band shell is designed with acoustics in mind, but it appears that it did not perform as well as it looks. So there was a couple of difficulties with this test. It's hard to say like what is best for the type of ensemble because chamber music is very different than a large ensemble like a band or orchestra with 60 plus members. Then another difficulty was the speaker volume. Just because it's a speaker, it's not quite as loud as acoustical instruments. And so it was kind of from the perspective of, I'd say, more of a chamber music volume overall versus a orchestra or full-size wind ensemble. Then the background noise was different place to place just because of the outdoor nature, like sprinklers or a nearby road. And then with the survey, could always use more participants to get a more accurate survey result. The conclusion, both in the survey and the impulse test, with my test, North Cheever Nook was the overall winner. It would definitely be best for chamber music, but for a large ensemble, there's so much reverb and it's so loud in there that I don't think it would work best. So coming kind of down the list for something that's not quite as loud of an area, Eagle Mount would be the next best for a larger ensemble or even chamber ensemble. It was really favored in the survey. There was a sharp impact in the impulse test for the reverb. That would need to be looked into if having a symphony or a band perform there. Hopefully it wouldn't muddy the sound up too much. And then I would like to acknowledge Professor Gregory Young for helping me with this project, kind of our professor of the class and weekly meetings, and gave lots of good suggestions for how to go about things. And then I would also like to thank Rob Maher for the interview and advice on impulse testing and getting an accurate survey. And then sources, and thank you all for listening.